To anyone else, it was a tombstone, a collection of rusted iron skeletons half swallowed by the greedy coastal mud, monuments to forgotten voyages and failed enterprises. For Elias Thorne, the man the locals in Port Blossom called the ghost of the mudflats, this ship graveyard was his inheritance and his purgatory. Every morning, the fog would roll in and wrap the skeletal masts in a gray shroud, mirroring the fog that had lived inside his head for 3 years, ever since the blast in Kandahar that had stolen his best friend, Marcus, and his own future. Beside him, Kaiser, his German shepherd, a silent, watchful shadow with eyes that held more understanding than any human's, would whine softly. The dog didn't see a graveyard. He saw a treasure chest, one that held a $200 million secret rooted in a decades-old act of betrayal, a secret that would force a broken soldier to become a warrior once more. If you believe that the deepest wounds can be healed by the most profound loyalty, and that sometimes a dog knows the way home better than any man, please consider supporting our channel by subscribing. We're honored to share these stories with you. Let us know in the comments, where in the world are you listening from today? Elias lived in the quiet hum of absence. His days were measured not in hours, but in the slow creep of the tide across the mudflats and the number of ghosts he could keep at bay. The largest of these ghosts was Marcus, his face forever frozen in a last, confident grin seconds before the world dissolved into fire and dust. Elias had been the team leader. He'd made the final call. It's clear. The words echoed in the rattle of the wind against the thin walls of his inherited trailer. He'd come here to disappear, to let the rust of his grief consume him just as the salt air was consuming the fleet of dead ships his estranged great-uncle had left him. The inheritance felt like a joke, a final, cosmic mockery of a life already stripped of purpose. The townsfolk thought so, too. Their whispers followed him on his rare trips for supplies, the broken black vet, inheriting a pile of scrap, haunted by more than just the gulls. Kaiser was the anchor that kept him from drifting away completely. The dog, a legacy from a life before the fall, was his routine, his responsibility, his silent confessor. When the whiskey bottle felt too much like a friend, Kaiser's heavy head would land in his lap, a low rumble in his chest, a gentle but firm command. It was Kaiser who refused to let the graveyard remain a symbol of decay. For weeks, the dog had developed an obsession with one vessel in particular, a skeletal World War II-era patrol boat listing hard to port, its name, the Wanderer, barely visible beneath layers of rust and grime. Every day, without fail, Kaiser would lead Elias out onto the treacherous mudflats, straight to the boat's wounded hull, and begin to whine, pawing insistently at one specific, dented steel plate near the waterline. It was an inexplicable, almost manic behavior. At first, Elias ignored it, but the dog was relentless. One gray afternoon, desperate for any task that would silence the screaming in his own mind, Elias gave in. Armed with a crowbar and a heavy hammer, he waded through the sucking mud, the dog's expectant gaze fixed on him. The plate was fused with rust, a stubborn scar on the ship's skin. Prying it loose was punishing work. His muscles screamed, sweat mingling with the salty spray. But with every grunt and heave, a small piece of his own inertia seemed to break away. Finally, with a groan of tortured metal, the plate gave way, revealing not the hollow darkness of the bilge, but a small, welded-shut steel box, nestled within a hidden compartment. His hands, steady and sure from years of disarming far more dangerous things, traced the seams of the box. This was no simple strongbox. It was custom fabricated, meant to withstand the sea and the passage of time. Back in the cramped workshop his great-uncle had left behind, Elias fired up a grinder. The high-pitched scream of the tool cutting through steel was a familiar song. He worked with the patience of a surgeon, his special forces training kicking in, treating the object with the respect due an unknown ordnance. Hours later, the final weld gave way. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a thick, leather-bound journal and a set of rolled schematics, brittle with age. The journal's pages were filled with the elegant, looping script of a man named Captain Alistair Finch. As Elias began to read, the story of the Wanderer came to life. It wasn't just a forgotten patrol boat. It was a vessel that had undertaken a clandestine mission in the final days of World War II. The mission: to intercept and scuttle a German U-boat attempting to smuggle a fortune in stolen gold and art to South America. The journal was filled with courage and duty, but the final entries were laced with paranoia and fear. The captain suspected a traitor in his own command, someone who had leaked their position. The mission had succeeded, but the Wanderer had been critically damaged in the fight and barely limped back to port, its secret and its sacrifice buried by the official story of a training accident. The schematics were not for the boat itself, but for a series of intricate modifications made to it: hidden compartments, a reinforced hull, a secret engine override. It was a puzzle, and for the first time in 3 years, Elias felt a flicker of something other than grief. He felt a mission. The restoration of the Wanderer became the restoration of Elias Thorne. The physical labor was a balm. Scraping away decades of rust felt like scraping away layers of his own guilt. The rhythmic work of sanding the teak deck smoothed the jagged edges of his memories. He replaced rotten planks, patched the hull, and slowly, painstakingly, began to piece the old boat back together. Each repaired section was a small victory against the decay that had defined his life. The ship graveyard, once a symbol of death, was becoming a place of rebirth. His work didn't go unnoticed. Jed, the grizzled owner of the local hardware store, who had initially regarded him with the same weary suspicion as the other townsfolk, started setting aside the best marine-grade supplies for him. A quiet nod of respect passed between the two men, an unspoken acknowledgement of a man rebuilding his world with his own 2 hands. Elias started sleeping through the night, the roar of the IED replaced by the whisper of the tide against the hull of the boat he was saving. He was healing 1 bolt, 1 board, 1 weld at a time. He was so focused on the past locked within the boat's frame that he never saw the threat sailing toward his future. It arrived in a cloud of dust and arrogance. A sleek, black sedan, laughably out of place on the muddy track, rolled to a stop beside his trailer. A man in a tailored suit, with a smile as polished and predatory as a shark's, stepped out. He introduced himself as Silas Croft, a developer. He swept a dismissive hand toward the ships. "Quite the collection of eyesores you have here, Mr. Thorne," he began, his voice smooth as silk. "I'm prepared to make you a generous offer to take this entire parcel off your hands. We're planning a luxury coastal resort. We'll clean all this history up for you." The offer was insultingly low, but it wasn't the money that made Elias's jaw tighten. It was the condescending way Croft spoke of the boats, of the history Elias was just beginning to understand. His eyes, cold and calculating, lingered on the Wanderer for a moment too long. A flicker of something, recognition, greed, passed through them. "It's not for sale," Elias said, his voice quiet but unyielding. He had become the boat's guardian, and he would not abandon his post. Croft's smile didn't falter, but his eyes hardened. "A pity," he said, his tone shifting from transactional to something far more menacing. "Some men get too attached to the past. It can be a very unhealthy fixation." The threat wasn't idle. 2 nights later, Kaiser's low, guttural growl sliced through the quiet of the trailer. Elias was awake instantly, his body moving with the fluid economy of a soldier. He slipped out into the darkness, a heavy tire iron in his hand. He didn't need to see them. He could smell the cheap cologne and cigarette smoke on the wind. 2 figures, shrouded in darkness, were down by the Wanderer, trying to pry open one of his newly patched sections of hull. Elias didn't charge. He used the graveyard to his advantage. A carefully thrown rock sent a sheet of corrugated steel clattering to the ground 100 yards away, a perfect diversion. As the men spun towards the sound, Elias emerged from the shadow of a rusted trawler, a silhouette of quiet menace. "You're on the wrong piece of property," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried across the mud with the weight of a command. The would-be saboteurs, startled and out of their element, scrambled away into the night. The next morning his phone rang. It was Croft. "I heard you had some visitors last night," he said, the false sympathy in his voice making Elias's skin crawl. "This place is dangerous. People get hurt, especially people who dig into things that should remain buried. The message was clear. Stop the restoration or the consequences would be severe. The threat galvanized Elias. Croft wasn't just a developer. He was connected to the boat's secret. He pored over the captain's journal and the complex schematics again, fueled by a new urgency. He realized the schematic wasn't just a map of modifications. It was a cipher. Cross-referencing coordinates from the journal with markings on the drawing, he found it. A sequence that unlocked a hidden meaning. The design pointed to a false backing in the captain's original footlocker, which he had salvaged and was using as a workbench. He pried it open. Inside, beneath another layer of oilcloth, was the ship's final, unofficial log. It detailed the betrayal. A young American intelligence officer, an ensign named Alistair Croft, had sold their mission coordinates to the Germans in exchange for a share of the stolen treasure. Silas Croft's father. The developer wasn't just trying to acquire land. He was trying to bury his family's treason. But the final discovery was the one that shattered Elias's world. Tucked into the logbook was a small bundle of letters. One of them was written in a familiar, sprawling hand. It was from Marcus's grandfather to Captain Finch. They had served together in an earlier part of the war. The letter spoke of a family heirloom, a silver, engraved compass, that Marcus's grandfather had asked the captain to hide on the boat for safekeeping, along with the deed to his family's land claim in Port Blossom. The very same land Silas Croft was trying to acquire for his resort. The conflict wasn't about a boat or a long-lost treasure. It was about Marcus. Croft was trying to steal from the family of the man Elias had failed to save. The weight of his guilt fused with the fire of his purpose. This was no longer about restoring a ship. It was about securing Marcus's legacy and delivering a justice that was 70 years overdue. Elias knew Croft would not send thugs next time. He would come himself, and he would come to finish it. The thought of going to the authorities was fleeting. A man like Croft would have them in his pocket. This was his fight. He had a choice. He could take the evidence and run, or he could stand his ground. He looked at Kaiser, then at the proud, scarred bow of the Wanderer. He was done running. For the next 48 hours, Elias Thorne ceased to be a restorer and became the SEAL he once was. He transformed the ship graveyard into a defensive perimeter. The terrain was his ally. He used old fishing nets as snares, rigged chains and scrap metal to create alarms, and mapped out fields of fire. He knew the tides, the soft spots in the mud, the sight lines. He used the hulking ships as cover and concealment. The Wanderer itself became the heart of his fortress. He wasn't preparing for a fight. He was preparing for a hunt, and he would be the one setting the trap. He was no longer a ghost hiding from his past. He was a guardian protecting a future, a promise to his fallen friend. The storm rolled in off the sea that night, a violent squall of wind and rain that seemed to mirror the tempest brewing in Elias's soul. Croft arrived with 3 men, confident the weather would mask their approach. They were wrong. Elias's first alarm, a tripwire connected to a stack of empty fuel drums, went off with a deafening clang, disorienting them. In the confusion, he moved. Using the lashing rain as cover, he neutralized the first man with a chokehold, leaving him bound and gagged in the mud. The second blundered into a net snare near the hull of an old shrimper. That left Croft and 1 other. They boarded the Wanderer, seeking higher ground, exactly as Elias had anticipated. The final confrontation took place on the slick, rain-lashed deck of the restored boat. Elias used the ship's architecture, swinging from a mast stay to disable the final thug. Now it was just him and Croft. "This all ends tonight," Croft snarled, pulling a pistol. He was faster, catching Elias off guard and pistol-whipping him to the deck. He stood over him, the gun aimed at his head, his face a mask of desperation and rage. "My father was weak," he spat, "but I will not fail to clean up his mess." The hammer clicked back. In that split second, a blur of black and tan fur erupted from the open hatch to the captain's quarters where Elias had hidden him. Kaiser, silent until that very moment, launched himself through the air. He hit Croft square in the chest with all his weight, the impact sending the gun skittering across the deck and into the sea. The man who had relied on wealth and violence was undone in an instant by an act of pure, unwavering loyalty. With Croft and his men subdued, the flashing lights of the sheriff's department illuminated the rain-swept graveyard. Jed, the hardware store owner, had grown suspicious of Croft's inquiries around town and made the call. The evidence from the ship's log, combined with the attempted assault, was enough to unravel Croft's entire criminal enterprise. His family's treason came to light, a permanent stain on their name. Elias, working with a pro bono lawyer, ensured the deed from the footlocker was honored, and Marcus's family home was saved. The story of the Wanderer and its secret mission became local legend. Elias used the recovered silver compass and a few gold coins he found with it to establish a foundation in his friend's name. He finished the restoration of the Wanderer not as a museum piece, but as a living vessel. The ship graveyard was transformed. It became the Marcus Thorne Maritime Retreat, a place where veterans could come to find peace, to work with their hands, and to heal by the sea, restoring old boats and, in the process, themselves. Elias was no longer a ghost. He stood on the deck of the fully restored patrol boat, Kaiser's head resting faithfully on his boot, and watched the sun rise over the water. He had finally brought his friend home. This story is a testament to the idea that sometimes the things we inherit, the burdens, the properties, the memories, are not endings but beginnings. It shows that the hard, physical work of rebuilding something broken can be the very medicine needed to heal a broken spirit. The unwavering loyalty of an animal like Kaiser can be the catalyst that reminds us what's worth fighting for, anchoring us to the present when the ghosts of the past threaten to pull us under. True redemption is not about erasing the past, but about honoring it, about building a better future on its foundations. Thank you for joining us for this story. If it resonated with you, we would be so grateful if you would like, share, and comment with your own stories of loyalty and healing. Please don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next video.